I've built furniture, cabinets, even installed shelves before, but never these mysterious new Houdini shelves. No brackets showing, floating like magic. Will it work? I don't know. I got a plan. 2 shelves, 2 methods, and 1 slightly concerned Shaz.
Daz reckons he's finally building those floating shelves under the TV, on a wall with lots of wires behind it. What could possibly go wrong this time?
4 years ago that I built and installed these storage cupboards, and honestly, well, I'm a little bit embarrassed about that. We will be using a reasonably cheap panel, but with the right stain, smart mounting, a little bit of craftsmanship, and a little bit of charm, we're going to be turning budget into bougie and getting it done. Okay, so here's the plan. I've bought this low-cost pre-made panel to make these bougie shelves. This panel is about the right length for my shelves, and it's a good thickness for the hole to mount it with.
Secret brackets, hidden fixings, and he's using some cheap pre-made panel that's supposed to look high-end.
So I'm using these pre-made panels. I'm going to split it right up the middle with my track saw, and that'll make my 2 shelves. I'm going to put those cut edges against the wall because these pre-made panels have a little bit of filler in them, and you'll want to just hide that from view. I'm going to be staining these shelves black, so I probably could have used any of the timber options available. The cheapest option was pine. I chose not to use that because it's quite recognizable and as a cheap timber, and I don't think that would have ended up looking that bougie. Okay, so I'm going to use some of these pre-manufactured brackets. They come in a range of styles. These ones are going to suit my application where I've got a floor joist that's just running the whole way along behind there. I also bought these brackets for the lower shelf, and that is not going to work because all I've got available is vertical timber studs, and I would have to mount the bracket this way, and then that would stick out above and below my shelf. You know, sometimes mistakes can lead to great innovation. So I could have used some of the pre-manufactured brackets that had a longer mounting plate, and then I would have been able to fix them to my studs for this lower shelf, but I've got another plan. I'm going to give these coach bolts a try. I do love me a little number 8 wire ingenuity, or is that M12 coach bolt mentality? I don't know, but is it going to work? Probably. So these M12 bolts that I got, they're about the same length as the brackets that I've got. Ideally, they would have been a little bit longer as they're going to have to go into the stud, but hopefully they work. So for mounting this bracket to the wall, I'm just going to use some screws. That's going to be nice and easy. As long as the screws are not too long that they come out the other side, everything should be fine. For mounting these bolts into the wall, I'm going to have to use a drill bit that's slightly smaller than the diameter of the bolt. Try it out on a piece of timber first and make sure it works. So for the holes into the shelf and into the walls, I've got a little drilling guide that will help keep my drill bit straight. Another option you can do is to drill a hole with your drill press through a piece of wood and use that as your drill guide. So for drilling the holes into the shelf, you're going to need to find a reasonably long drill bit. This is just long enough to make my 200mm deep holes.
Just don't scratch my lovely paint job this time, or the flooring.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I'm going to put down this drop cloth. Planning. On that note, you're going to need a laser level or a bubble level to get your shelf level. You're going to need a tape measure and a pencil and probably a stud finder to mark out the framing behind your wall.
Don't drill into the wall wires, eh?
Already checked, already marked, obviously. Yeah, so make sure you mark out on the wall where any wires or pipes might be. You might even want to cut small holes to use as viewing holes. You may be able to see them by pulling out an electrical outlet or something like that. So the thread on these bolts goes up a little bit further than what's going into the wall. This could make my shelf a little sloppy, combined with the fact that my bolt's a little short.
Maybe you should have used the threaded rod idea?
I might still have to. Stay tuned. Alright, so we've got the drop cloth down and we're getting it done. I'm using some masking tape to protect the walls while I mark out where the shelves are going to go. I'm using a flashlight to look inside the walls to verify where the framing and wires are. I'm marking out all the framing locations with my stud finder. I'm laying out my shelves to work with my cabinets and the speakers that I've already got. Using my laser to mark out some level lines. Here I'm using my drill to accurately verify the framing locations in the wall. I was going to use this drill guide that I picked up last time I was in Europe, but I wasn't that impressed with how tight it was. I found that just drilling through a bit of wood with my drill press seemed to give me a better result. I fire up the rattle gun and blap the coach screw into the wall. The plan is to cut off the head of the screw to create a pin for the shelves to slide onto. yeah, this didn't really work. We're gonna try something else. I put the screw in the full depth of the stud there where my tape was, and it was still wriggling. So I'm gonna investigate why. Is that in a dimension smaller than 10 mil? Yeah, it's 9 mil. That explains why I'm getting wriggle. Now what I should have done was made this measurement before I went and drilled my hole in the wall. That hole should have been smaller. I stuffed it up. I wanna try another method. So hey, maybe that's why this is all happening. I'm gonna try a threaded rod, or if you're an American, all thread. I'd really be curious if there's somewhere else in the world that calls it something else. Please let me know in the comments. Now the inside of this thread, also 9mm. If you take two nuts and you tighten them against each other, basically turn that into a bolt. Okay, so I just made myself a fresh 10 mil hole. Now I'm gonna have to taper that. So I'm just gonna use a flap disc. Ghetto tap is complete. That works equally as well as this. I'd say it's gonna work better with a 9mm hole, so I'm gonna try that. I'm also having another thought. Just driving in a threaded rod with a tapered end with no other modifications. I'll try that as well. One last thing. The problem that I have is that I already made one of the holes 10mm. Can I solve my problem with some plumber's thread tape? Okay, so that's amazing. Oh, it's left the thread tape in there. I think I have solved my problem. I have tried a multitude of options. Drill bit sizes, ghetto tap, just a tapered end on a threaded rod, and using some thread tape that's normally for plumbing work. And in conclusion, a 7.5mm drill bit worked the best. Now that's really, really small in comparison to the 12mm threaded rod or all thread that I'm forcing in there. Make that hole as small as you can possibly make it. This is the 7.5mm drill bit. I also came to the conclusion that making a special ghetto tap, nah, just taper the end of your threaded rod. That actually is tighter because it's compressing the wood fiber and it's very soft wood rather than actually cutting it out. Plumbing, thread tape, hack of the day, sorts it all out. So the problem I have is that I've already drilled one of these holes at 10mm. It's in the exact place I want to put my shelf. I then put 5 wraps of the thread tape around the threaded rod or all thread. I then thread that into that hole. It makes a really nice fit. I'm so happy, solved all my problems. I'm gonna cut 3 sections of this. I am gonna taper the end of it and I'm gonna fire 2 of them into 2 7.5mm holes, and the other one I'm gonna fire into the 10mm hole that I've already drilled in the wall with wraps of thread tape on it. Anyway, problem is solved and we're moving on to getting it done, eh? After marking out level on the lower shelf with the auto-balancing light wizard, I'm on to making holes for the remaining 2 fixings for the lower shelf. Using the drill again to confirm the structure's location in the wall, I set the drill bit to the correct length in the drill. I drill through the plasterboard first to get the location perfect. This makes it easier to keep the hole in the right spot using my hillbilly drill guide. See the small holes I drilled to perfectly locate the center. I've marked the required depth with some paint on the threaded rod. With nuts locked against each other on the end of the threaded rod, I ugga-dugga them in with the rattle gun. Ah, sweet as, that's working really nicely now. I'll whip off the nuts and I'm on to the next one. And the last one fits snugly in the oversized hole with plumbing tape for the win. I need to measure out the bracket location as unfortunately these ones didn't come with a center mark. I mark out and pre-drill the holes for all the fixings as there's really no room for error here. I then remove the tape before ugga-dugging the bracket on with the fixings. I've mounted the brackets on top of the plasterboard and they seem to be holding firmly enough. Once I've got all 4 brackets for the top shelf on, I check them with a level. I managed to just loosen and retighten the screws on one bracket to adjust it slightly. Alright, on to making these pre-made panels bougie. I chuck some timber spacers on the bench underneath my panel, whip out my 3-meter rail, mark out the center of the panel accounting for the blade width, shimmy the rail into place, and fire up the super straight panel slicer. After struggling through this cut with the saw jamming a couple of times, I realized it was just time for a new blade. I trim them to length using a shorter rail, and back inside I go. Come on, what are you waiting for? I place the shelves on the bracket and then I shimmy them. half the width of the bracket pins to the right. I can then place my speed square on the right hand side of the bracket and mark the center of the pins on the shelf. I transfer the center marks onto the shelf edge. I adjust my square to identify as a scribe and mark the center of the width down the panels. I whip out a hillbilly drill guide using some leftover hardwood in my drill press. I punch the hole centers and carefully clamp my hillbilly drill guide onto the edge of my panel. I drill these deep holes in a number of short sections, clearing the shavings from the drill bit in between the passes. The drill bit I'm using is only just long enough. I set it to the correct depth in the drill and remove the hillbilly drill guide to drill it to the final depth. Check the depth and onto the rest. I'm using an auger drill bit rather than a spade type drill bit because this is more likely to run straight. Possibly a little bit too happy with yourself there, Kiwi Daz. I went and bought a longer drill bit, so have marked the correct depth on it with some tape. Holes all drilled and time for a test fit. One hole in the top shelf's in the wrong spot, and the holes in the bottom shelf are too tight. I fix them in the shop and try them again. Apart from the fact, it's coming right out the middle. If you squint, it's mid. So Kiwi Daz back again. I had a total disaster. This is the drill bit deciding to make its way out of the top face, the good face of my shelf. Total disaster, absolute disaster. I did it on both shelves, straight out the good face. If it had been on the bottom, I might have just lived with it and forgot it was even there. Learn from my mistakes so that you don't have to make them too. This panel is pretty minimal. It's 25mm thick. The holes are 13mm or 12mm diameter. It's only leaving 5.5 to 6mm on either side of the hole of tolerance before I'm coming out of the face of the timber. So I've got another plan. I'm going to do it a different way now because of this. I bought myself a whole nother panel. Yeah, a bit of messing around. Not that happy with what happened, but this is the breaks, you know. Things don't always work out how you plan and you just got to roll with it. I'll show you this one too. So, you see I had the hole in the wrong place when I went to go put it on the shelf there. And then when I fixed it, straight out the face. The good side. I'll reuse this timber for something, don't worry. It won't get completely wasted. Alright, let's get it done, Kiwi Daz. I've whacked a new blade into the super straight panel slicer. I adjust the square of the blade after the mishap with the drill bit. With the new blade, the panels are sliced up in a jiffy. Using a square and the shorter rail, I slice the new panels to length. I'm not 100% sure why the drill bit came out the face of the panel. Maybe the hillbilly drill guide wasn't clamped down hard enough on my drill press when I drilled it. Maybe the edge of my panel wasn't cut square enough. Whatever the reason, I didn't want to waste another panel. I've decided instead to route out a channel in the bottom of the panel to locate the fixings. With a couple of scraps clamped down as guide, the angry electric beaver makes swift work of this task. This solution is not as bougie, I know, but the shelves are down really low, so no one's going to see it anyway. Everything's going well, but you know, if there's a way to stuff it up, I'm sure I can find it. If there was a problem, I'll find it. Check out my videos so that you can avoid it. Kiwi Daz. Ding ding ding, chicka ding ding. I bang on some tunes and route out the channels on the other shelf. I've decided to make some cutouts in the back of my shelf between the fixing points. I'm doing this so that I can run cables up and down behind the shelves. The rail saw also has a plunge function. This is super handy for completing this task. You could also use a jigsaw for this task, which is what I use for the shorter cuts and getting into the corners. The added bonus of making these notches in the back of the shelves is that now only small areas of the shelf are touching the wall, and this will simplify scribing the shelves to fit perfectly against the wall. My walls are far from perfectly flat. Here I am using a small washer as a great hack for scribing the shelf to the contour of the wall. I use a larger washer on the upper shelf as there's a larger wiggle. I make the adjustments with the Angry Electric grater. Time for some finishing touches with a 45-degree bevel bit in the Angry Electric Beaver. I set it at a shallow depth as a quick way to knock off some of the sharp edges. I then set it a little deeper to cut a bevel on the front edges of the shelves to make them bougie. I give both shelves a quick tidy up with the Angry Wood Smoother. The brackets I used on the top shelf either need to be recessed into the wall or the shelf. I chose the shelf. I freehand this like a boss with the Angry Electric Beaver. I broke a small router bit doing this and finished it with a bigger one that I probably should have used in the first place. I'm snipping up some steel strap to use as fixings to hold the shelf on. I stick the screws for these into a piece of cardboard and slot them onto some wire for painting. Spray on some matte black paint and that's that job done. Shaz reckons I don't have the patience to stain these panels properly, so she's giving me a hand. She brushes the stain on and then wipes it off with a rag to avoid getting brush marks. It's starting to look pretty bougie, but we decide that one coat's just not enough and go for a second. On this coat, Shaz opts for a roller to spread the stain more evenly. I mark out the bottom of the panel for my fixing clips. I wrap some tape around my drill bit as a depth stop to ensure that I don't drill these holes too deep and come out the other side of my panel. Shaz is helping me again and we're putting a Danish oil over top of the stain. Multiple coats of that and the shelves are now looking pretty bougie. I install the shelves and fixing clips to keep them in place, and I get the Inspector Bowie sign off.
Really nice, but now can you finish the stair lights and the 17 other things you've started?